When to use a Ned rig. Guys, let's think about this. I got a couple of favorite Ned baits and I'll explain why, a couple of different Ned setups. It's actually fairly elaborate, though you would not think Ned rigging is elaborate at all. So let's think about it for a second. Everybody knows, probably right off the bat, I don't care if you went bass fishing less than 10 times, you probably know Ned rigging's very popular technique to do in the winter. Well, why is that? In the wintertime, bass's metabolism decreases, unless it's a spotted bass or a smallmouth, and they're a little bit more active. But in regards to largemouth bass, they slow down quite a bit, and they start keying in on bottom baits once that water temperature drops south of 50 degrees. They're often associating to the bottom or associating down. So when would I throw a Ned rig versus something like a drop shot? You're going to hear me say associating down or inverted or international relations, you know, the bird. Yeah, old Top Gun reference there for you. But when I say they're inverted, it's where bass are in this mode. When they feed, they're looking straight down. And a drop shot, you know, is suspended up. Well, a Ned rig, you know, it's right down there on the bottom. So why would I throw that over a drop shot? Now, there's often times where I'll start finesse fishing and I'm throwing a drop shot and I'm like, they should be eating here. And then all of a sudden I'll pick up a shaky head or a Ned rig or a Neko rig, and I'll explain the differences and why periodically throughout this season of 2023 for you. But then I'll drop back down to a Ned rig. And why I'm going to explain this is because when they're inverted, even if you have a 10-inch dropper, if a bass is sitting belly down looking forward, that worm's above his head. But bass often get in that position where they're comfortable feeding down in the winter. Tail up, head down. That's where those smaller bottom baits work remarkably well. And they get used to eating small stuff in the winter on a more regular that maybe crawls by them. Little juvenile crawfish, believe it or not, crawfish under 3 inches don't dig into the mud and hibernate like the bigger ones do. The little juveniles are often more out. Gobies are more regular. There's much more smaller life activity in the winter. When their metabolism's slower, it's easier to get that tiny meal that comes past them. So when would I fish the Ned rig? I have to be confident that there is fish there. If you fish a small pond and you know one little drainage or one little spot holds the fish, throwing a Ned rig there and being confident that they're there is going to work for you. If you're out in a boat or a river system, a spot where you've caught fish year round and you know historically you have good intel that there's fish on that location, or you're physically seeing fish on the graph that won't bite, you're trying other stuff. Or here's another scenario, you go down the bank with a jerkbait or a lipless and you catch one and you're like, there has to be more there. That's a fantastic time to pick up a Ned rig and try it when that water temperature's cold. In regards to clarity, I've caught them on a Ned rig in muddy water. I've caught them on gin clean water. It doesn't seem to matter. You have these hard heads, you know, this little EWG style, and I'll break that down for you in a second. These little hard heads are tapping rocks. They can feel it. The bass are keyed in to using their lateral line when it's cold and it's muddy. And believe it or not, even when the water temperature jumps above 80 degrees in the summertime, they often do that inverted bite again. But Ned rigs can work well only on lakes that don't have a lot of grass or silty mud on the bottom. So keeping that in mind, when am I going to fish the Ned rig? Typically cold water, below 50 degrees, the Ned rig is going to shine. It can't be really muddy bottom. It can't have a ton of grass on the bottom. Otherwise, it's going to get lost in the chaos down there. Or I can't catch them on something else, and I'm confident they're down there. The Ned rig's going to work remarkably well in those scenarios. All right, guys, now when you see Ned rigs, whether that's an EWG or a standard exposed hook, you'll see that the hook is fixed to the head. I oftentimes, when I tell you in those summer months, or you could do a little Carolina rig version, run that's like about an 1/8 ounce to a 3/16 or even up to a 1/4 bullet weight, okay? And you can peg it on there if you want, if there's grass. But if you notice the height of your grass, you can just order like a little 1/0 or a little 2/0 EWG I order the bulk packages of the BKK Chimera 1.0s. Okay, that's the 1/0 size. And I strictly Texas rig these smaller plastics. If I feel like there's growth down there, or I see those fish and the bite is very difficult, they won't bite anything else for me, I'll put a bobber stop and I'll adjust it to where when my weight falls, my hook without a jig head will float up just above that grass. And it's almost like a miniature Carolina rig that you can use with a variant of a Texas rig by just putting a bobber stop on there. So you can adjust it up to where that little plastic floats up out of that grass, and oftentimes they hammered that. I've done that about 5 or 6 times in my bass fishing career when nothing else worked, and it absolutely got hammered. So I'm not gonna outrule that one for you. A little tip I wanna mention for you guys, and you've probably heard me bring this up in past videos. I have other Ned rigging videos, but this is about when I like to use it. If you're on a body of water that typically has a lot of grass, and it's usually gone in the early spring months, but you see those coots, those little mud hens, those little black ducks diving down, they love to get those leftover little roots from grass that stayed a little longer in the wintertime. So any area where you see coots, there's typically going to be juvenile crawfish in the root systems for those plants. Remember, like I said, those smaller crawfish don't often hibernate like the big ones do. They don't dig down. They're right around the base of those little leftover roots or that grass that first starts to grow in the year. So if you're around that sticky bottom stuff, you're going to want to use an EWG style Ned rig like this here. This happens to be the 3-inch floating Ned Senko. The reason why I like the Ned Senko now that I've been playing with it a lot on the EWG style is it has a little bit more body. It's not the super stretchy type of material. It's not TPE. It's not the indestructible stuff. So on EWG, it's a lot easier to rig straight, and it fishes remarkably well with a little bit more thickness coming through that debris on the bottom. I'm fishing that right here on the Sticks number 2. That's the hybrid spin. That's 30-pound braid to an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. That's that Sticks number 2, stixfishing.com. That is my rod company. I did design every one of these rods. Now, if I'm fishing around more open structure and cover, stuff where I don't have a lot of snags, I'm typically gonna fish that more exposed hook. This is that new BKK not EWG, the new BKK Ned head right here. And these are those light plastic wire keepers. That's just going to help keep it clean, but it does come through remarkably well, and they're very soft. And you're going to see I have a much more narrow Ned rig right here. This is the Ned Salamander. That is that super stretchy TPE material. I helped co-design this along with Jose Chavez back when we did the Ned rig program for Savage Gear. This is really, really nice for almost holding in place. If your line is tight at all, you're gonna get movement out of it. It's so subtle with a lot of ribs, but on those exposed hooks, that's where I like a more skinny Ned rig, something more subtle. The EWG style Neds, I like it a little bit beefier with that Ned Senko, that floating one. Now the setup I throw that on is the Sticks number 1. That's a 7'6" medium light with 20-pound braid to a 6-pound tactical fluorocarbon leader. Now, you're gonna notice, you've probably seen a big difference in head size right here. A very critical factor to fishing a Ned rig is using just enough weight to where you feel the bottom. If you're fishing a body of water and you're finding fish in 5 foot of water and it's not windy out and you're using a 1/4 ounce head, it's probably doing too much. It's getting buried in that silt. It's dredging the bottom too much. You're gonna get snagged. Just enough weight to keep it comfortably down to where you can feel it on your rod is critical. Good universal weights for out here where I live in Northern California, 3/16 and 1/4 ounce. But you can see I live on a private lake that's typically 8 foot or shallower, so I'm throwing an 1/8 ounce head. This is one of those exceptions. If I went up to Clear Lake where they're shallower in the wintertime, a lot of the time, then I may throw the 1/8 ounce there as well. I'm using just enough weight to where I can feel it. That way when they pick it up, it's much more subtle. They're willing to commit, they put it on their crushers, and they start to swim away. Too much weight when it's up shallow, a lot of the time when they're finicky, they're just being very selective, they may drop it before you even know. I would much rather them hang on to it a little bit longer so you have the chance to drill them. All right, guys, you drop the Ned rig down there, you put a drop shot on them, you see them down there on your graph. An active fish will pick up a Ned rig if you see those little squiggly spaghetti marks on the bottom. If he's not active, he's not going to pick it up. If he didn't touch a drop shot, he didn't grab a Ned rig, he's not hungry. These are very finessey, hungry style presentations. They look real. This is where you're going to want to go to the opposite. Go back to my YouTube channel, Informative Fisherman, right here, and look up the blade bait, how to fish a blade bait, or blade bait 101. You go back a few videos, you'll probably find it on there. Vertically jigging a blade bait on those fish you see down there that won't touch your other finesse stuff are inactive fish, and you could score reaction strikes that way and put additional fish in the boat as well. All right, guys, now if you're wondering why the braid to fluorocarbon, it's very, very sensitive. This is light line, so I'm backing off the drag a lot. Just lightly dragging these on the bottom, you'll feel the tension with braid to fluorocarbon. If you're making long cast in water that's 15, 20 foot deep, oftentimes if you're fishing straight fluorocarbon, you're just not gonna feel it. This is much more affordable way to fish, and it's much more effective when Ned rigging. Do you have to fish it this way? No, you don't. How long is my leader? Typically about 6.5 to 7 foot. I fish gin clear water, and I've caught them just fine with a 2-foot leader. So you don't have to be overly critical. I like a little longer leader. In case I break off my Ned, I still have some room to tie on to that leader. You don't have to retie another 7-foot leader at that point. I'm Nick, the Informative Fisherman. Hopefully you guys picked up some tips from this right here. I'll put the description of each of the product and their links in the comment section or in the description below this video. Appreciate you guys watching. Follow me on all the popular social media channels. Thank you.